African Americans have no culture. Let's talk about this for a second. I've seen a lot of conversations on this app recently about how some African people, or some specifically Black British people, talk about how African Americans are so removed from their roots, and so they don't know their history, their culture, and effectively have no culture of their own. And in the time I've spent living in the UK, I will say that I have heard Black British people say something similar about African Americans a few times. And it's a very interesting, very strange thing to say for a few reasons. So let's talk about culture for a bit. As we talk about culture, I'd like you to keep two things in mind. One, jazz. And the other is an idea that is expressed by the philosopher Olufemi Taiwo. Taiwo occasionally says that he does not believe that any culture has a monopoly on their ideas. So when a culture, when a people group puts something out into the universe, it becomes basically available to all people to take and use however they want. So a culture does not own its ideas. Once something gets put out into the universe, it becomes free for anyone to engage with. This is part of what it means to be human. And this is why sometimes to have proper conversations about culture. So back to jazz. In very simple terms, jazz is Black American music. Jazz, as a genre of music, was born out of the United States, out of the minds and talents and practices of African American musicians. Now, of course, there are elements of jazz, rhythmic ideas and improvisational ideas that we can trace back to Africa more directly, but the fact remains that as a genre, jazz would never have happened if not for African Americans. And this makes it a part of American culture. It's important to remember that African Americans were not immigrants to the United States, and they have roots that go deeper than a lot of the other people groups that currently inhabit the country. So jazz is American music, gifted to the American story, and really gifted to the rest of the world from African Americans. So much so that the U.S. Department of State conducts what it calls cultural diplomacy, which basically involves the American government sending jazz musicians to different parts of the world to just vibe with musicians, because it sees that as promoting American values and cultures around the world. And it sees that as a good thing. But again, cultures are complicated. There would be no jazz without traditional African music, but there would also be no jazz without the African Americans who lived in a specific place and time to make jazz happen. Complexity of all of these things, we can even go as far as saying that contemporary African pop music, Afro beats, would not exist without African Americans. This is Fela. He is the father of Afrobeat. And Afrobeat is like the dad of Afro beats with an S. Fela was a Nigerian musician who created Afrobeat by bringing together different genres of music, most notably jazz, funk, high life music, which is traditional West African music. Jazz and funk are important, are integral to Afrobeat, and jazz and punk are both styles of music that came out of the African American experience. In other words, there would be no Afrobeat without African American music, and there would be no Afrobeats today without Afrobeat. So when we as continental Africans vibe with our Afrobeats, well, we thank Fela for coming up with Afrobeat, and we thank all of the African American musicians for coming up with jazz and funk. And in this, we see the complexity of cultures, how they are very intertwined with each other. I'm standing up now. So to deny the culture of African Americans, to deny the contribution of African Americans to American culture, you are denying very integral parts of American culture itself. And so keeping all this in mind, we are confronted with the fact that it is incorrect to think.
As an African woman, and I'm sure he's an African man, the way that he spoke so brilliantly, I would like to expand this conversation outside of music. The conversation of American or African American, Black American, however you'd wish to identify, have no culture. It is a one that is deeper than of music, although music is part of an integral part of African people. But we're going to expand on it in a different way. When we talk about culture, right, and the way that he defined ideas being put out into the universe and can be circulated to anyone, and that's what makes us human. Well, I'm paraphrasing here. We talk about roots, right? Like he said, roots of self. That's exactly what we talk about. That creates an identity of who are you, where are you from, what's your language, and that's one important conversation that I expanded on some time ago, that if you claimed yourself as an African American or Black American to be indigenous to Americans, what are your roots in America prior to colonization? Who are you before colonization? That's the conversation that we are having. We're not denying them of the impact that they've created in the world, because if you look through our genres, you'd see that African Americans have been active even in development of things that are integral in the society. Things like, electricity and what and cars and stuff like that, and toilets and whatever, right? The things that makes us human, most of the things have been created by Black American. They have contributed to the society in multiple ways. They were given scraps to eat, and they had to make food out of scraps. They contributed not just to jazz, but they contributed to hip hop as well, and how hip hop has evolved as a genre to the entire world. But we're not talking about that. When we have this conversation, I feel like it's important that we are not talking about their contribution, which is very evident. It is evident. We are very, very, very well aware. I mean, I like mac and cheese, and it's very Black American. It's very American. I like mac and cheese. I like Black American music because of how it touches my soul. And I love Black American singers. I do not take away what they have created and what they have contributed to the world. It's very impactful. And America would not be what it is without them. And that's something Americans fail to realize about Black Americans. They deny them of that contribution. Okay, so when we talk about Black American having no culture, we talk about identity, we talk about language, we talk about other integral parts such as tradition, things that that makes us, our names. My name is Bitumelo, right? My name, where I come from is the root of my name, Bitumelo. You can find out who I am just by my name, So names were given to them to swap out their identities, to remove them of selves. Now they were giving names like Keisha. I'm not saying Keisha is a bad thing, but I'm giving an example that when they swap you, let's say I'm Bitumela and then they swap me and then they give me a name of Keisha. Who's Keisha? I don't know, where do I go from here as Keisha? 29-year Keisha, and then I now live in a remote island and I lose touch of what makes me Bitumelo, and then I'm now becoming Keisha. So we are not talking about other things, and I would like to add and trigger part of culture, which is history. History is important. The history of Black American, as brutal as it is integral part of them. It is part of who they are, right? We cannot remove it from them, right? But that is why we also said, who are you before colonization? If you are indigenous to America, if you claim yourself to be indigenous to America, who are you before America? And I hope you have listened up to this point, because most of my followers here are Americans. And I do appreciate you guys, I do. And I want you to listen to me, that who are you? If you are, and don't be offended, like I'm curious, like I want you to understand this. What is your culture? Let me into that, and then expand it in the conversation, in the chats. Let us know if you identify him as a Black American born, raised in America before colonization, before whatever happened to you happened. What is your history? What's your people? What happened to the roots that happened to you there? Because you did not start with slavery, because that's the history that we get. Give us the history before colonization. Give us an identity. Give us Black Americans outside of this trauma. Give us something, because that is not something that we're not discussing. Although what he discussed is important, give us a depth and make us understand if you can.
So Black people, do y'all know when we when we laugh in our hands. Do y'all know where that comes from? So back when our ancestors were slaves, and you know that we couldn't eat sugar or anything like that back in the day because that was considered a delicacy and only slave masters and, you know, rich white people were allowed to eat sugar. Due to the slaves not being able to eat anything that contained sugar, they had beautiful teeth. And when master and all these rich white people and the presidents and stuff seen you smiling, kikiing with them big pretty ass white teeth, he said, let me get them pretty bitches right up out you, and they right up out of their mouth. So, in summary, we had to hide our teeth in order to keep them from being forcefully taken, along with everything else that we had forcefully taken. Ain't that some shit?
Because most of what you cling on as your own culture, tradition, and history are things that the white man has given you. His religion has given you, a name has given you, a history he has given you. You have a life outside of that painful existence of being a Black American in America. Who are you before that? And that's what we are coming towards. And I'm going to add Black Americans to just expand this conversation of identity and how identities are formed and becomes part of culture, tradition, history, and sort of that. Remember, I gave you an example of myself and my name and it becoming part of who I am and my culture, right? An identity. So we feel like Black Americans lack that sense of identity, and they oftentimes have to go back and forth with Americans who are indigenous to that land. So if you are indigenous to that land, what is your belief? In better terms, what is your belief? Who are you outside of this painful creation that was given to you, Christianity? Who are you outside of Keisha? What's your surname? We are not removing or stripping you anything of being Black American. You earned being there. You've built America. Anyone is more deserving to be in America, it will be you, because your ancestors have built America to be what it is today, that has contributed immense wealth to America and what it is. We are not taking it away from you. We're not saying erase that and come to Africa and start building your identity. It's you accepting that I am who I am in America, in a world that erased me, and it's okay, you know? So that's the conversation we are having when we say Black Americans have no culture. Do you understand? Do you understand, or do we need to have... Because it's bigger than just music. It's bigger than just music and just saying, oh, well, music.
You know why Americans love Christianity so much? Because Americans swear by binaries. And Christianity is a giant system, structure of binaries. Heaven and hell, holy and unholy, Satan and God, sin and holiness. You know why this country loves Christianity so much? Because they took everything that they use, every binary that they use to dehumanize people and just transferred it to Christianity. So if I can get you to understand that even though Satan, Lucifer, came directly from God, if I can sell you the story that Satan is the opposite of God, that up is the opposite of down, that heaven is the opposite of hell, then I can get you to understand why Black people are the opposite of white people. Then I can get you to understand why white people are holy and Black people are unholy. Why these people are human and these people are subhuman. You don't have to think about anything. You don't have to think about what's right or wrong. You don't have to decide what's better or worse. All you have to know is that that shit over there is not you. So you straight. You don't even have to read the Bible. You don't even have to pray. You don't even have to practice the damn religion. As long as you accept the binary, as long as you accept him as your personal savior, you go up and they go down. Colonialism, Christianity, and white supremacy are the triangle that continuously cycle and feed upon one another. You cannot have any one of them without the other because they all rationalize and justify the other two. You love the image of God, not God. You love the image of God because he represents everything that is opposite to what is unholy and unpure in this country. A white man sitting in a white robe with a white beard and white cloud. So if you could worship that, if I could sell you that story and show you that that's good enough to worship, then why would you not worship a white man in a white house with a white suit and a white